Go ahead.
Being a real estate broker is no different than being a psychiatrist. You need to be able to handle the emotions and the economic side of what an owner's dealing with, and try to show him how he can come out, if he can come out. And a lot of landlords will say, you know what, I'm just going to hold. I'm not going to rent my space. I'm just going to wait until the market improves. And a company that we represent bought a building on Fifth Avenue, which goes straight through to Madison. And when they closed on the property, the space on Madison Avenue was leasing at $1,200 a foot. Within a very short period of time, the market had dropped, and no one was getting more than $600 a foot. And they said, you know what? We're just going to paint the windows black, wait out the market. And they did. And they were successful. We were successful in leasing the space 2 or 3 years later. So that's what landlords who can afford to do. The ones who can't afford to do that either have to sell their property and get out of there because they're not going to be able to lease it, or renegotiate with their banks.
Apparently what I've got note on, Brad, is that you seem to be doing some pretty incredible business in the retail world out there in the Big Apple of New York City, which I find quite fascinating. God bless Mark Advent for connecting us. He said, you need to talk to this guy. I said, if you say that, let's jump into it and have a great conversation. So something tells me you've done some incredible things. You've been around the block, literally. You've put buildings on blocks and probably all up and down that beautiful city of New York. But Brad, where does it start for you? Where does the journey begin? What's all of the evolution and I would say milestone points that got you to this phase in life? If we could start there, I think that'd be great.
Well, I guess to start, before I went into the real estate business, I was a retailer in Europe. Mm-hmm. And when I came back to New York, I sold my business. When I came back to New York, I realized my things jumping around. I realized that nobody really knew about leasing retail space. The same guy who leased the office building above was leasing the retail space, and he had no idea of relative value. Mm. So I ended up going to a lot of the larger firms who were then leasing office buildings and telling them, look, I could be value added. My then company could be value added. Because we know about retail, we know what it's worth, and your guys don't. Nothing wrong with not knowing it's better to know what you don't know mm-hmm. than think you know it all. And they were very receptive because the bottom line is their management fees are based on income. The more income they got, the larger their management fees. So they had no problem with us getting involved. And at that time, there were a number of real estate firms around that are no longer here. Have gone out of business and just people have died off. I ended up starting a retail leasing company, which was called Garrick Aug Associates, with 2 other people. I split off from them and joined a company called the Edward S. Gordon Company. When I joined, there was, I'm going to say, 10 people. Mm. That company is now 16,000 people.
Wow.
It's known as CBRE. Through a number of different purchases. And I was there for 23 years, leasing retail space. Then I went over to Cushman & Wakefield. I was there for 13 years. And now I'm with Colliers, all doing the same thing. Taking existing landlords and educating them to what the value of their spaces are today, because it's different than it was yesterday. It used to be higher, now it's lower ever since the pandemic, mm-hmm. although retail was getting soft before the pandemic.
Sure.
The pandemic certainly didn't help.
Right.
Certain areas of the city have not come back, and certain areas have come back at half the price they were before. but at least things are leasing. And, like anything else, retail leasing is supply and demand business. The more supply and the less demand, the lower the prices go. The more demand and less supply, the higher the prices go.
Sure.
And it's very different than any other kind of leasing, because if you're on the right side of Park Avenue on the 32nd floor or on the left side, no one knows the difference. No one knows where you are. But if you're on a street where nobody walks, you're not going to do any business. So, it's fairly easy to understand, but not that many people did.
Right. So I naturally want to go towards the pandemic part, because I believe that there's a lot of what would be adaptability there in terms of how to pivot and continue to make your business go. But you said something before that wants to take me down that road, Brad, which is you were in Europe and then you came back, you sold your business. So a couple things. Was that an early sale of a business that was good for you, or was that just kind of an offloading? And then even if I was
at the time, it was good for me. I was living in London.
Okay.
And through hook or by crook, I ended up going into the retail business. And we had 3 stores on the King's Road. This is back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When London was really happening.
Mm-hmm.
Not that many people go back that far.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, and there's plenty, I came back to New York and needed to figure out what I was going to do. And I just lucked into retail leasing by just a weird set of circumstances that really educated me as to how much money someone can make leasing retail space, or leasing any office space, any retail, any office or industrial. I never went any place but retail because I knew it best.
Sure. When you started out, did you know retail back in what it sounds like London? Were you born in London, or were you born here in America?
No, I was born here.
Born here, okay.
I was born here. I went to London for work.
Okay.
What I was doing there is not relevant, but I was under contract there to do what I was brought over there to do. And my area was disbanded, but I was under contract, so they had to pay me.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up had friends. We started to import used jeans and T-shirts and things like that from the States to London. Everybody likes English stuff. There, they like American stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Or liked American stuff. And we built 3 stores, ran them for a while, had the opportunity to sell them. I was still young. I thought this is an opportunity for me to travel. I was of Vietnam age, but not physically capable of going to war. I was 4F. I don't know if anybody knows what that means anymore.
Please tell us. What does 4F mean?
When you're a young man back in those days, you ended up in the draft system.
Okay.
Vietnam was going on. And 1A was next to go. 4F was women and children go first. Usually it's because you've got a physical issue that they don't want to take the chance in taking you into the Army.
Okay.
I had what was called a permanently dislocating shoulder, which didn't ever bother me, but kept me out of the Army because they didn't want to know that I ended up getting hurt and they had to pay me for the rest of my life. Coincidentally, last July, I just had my shoulder replaced. So now my shoulder's perfect.
So now you can get drafted and go to war.
Yeah, but I think I'm past that age.
Yeah. Okay, understood. So fair enough. So then you end up in London. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur then, before or
Yes.
around that time? You do. Okay, so you're finding yourself and discovering that business and going in that direction of creating a lifestyle around solving a problem is a direction that you're proud to go in, and you've realized that you have that ability as an entrepreneur. Is that right?
On some issues, not on all.
Okay, understood. So break that down for me. On some, meaning Because I guess where I'm going with that is people today, I think, nothing really changes over the decades except for the years. I mean, I still think people want to explore how to be better in business and they want to figure out how someone like you discovered what made them do well in business. And, I like diving deep into those types of parts of life and business. And so when you say that not all parts, well, what do you mean by that? So if you would
Well,
bring some attention
I,
to that.
I I can solve problems in the areas that I know.
Uh-huh.
I can't solve problems in the areas that I don't.
Sure.
But what you have is kind of a strange system. Young people are raised to go to high school and then go to college, go to grad school, get their degrees, which in an entrepreneurial world mean absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to apply for a salary position at IBM or any of the other companies, all that stuff's very important. But if you're truly an entrepreneur, no one cares if you ever went to school.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at most of the really successful entrepreneurs, they never went to college or never graduated from college, like Bill Gates.
Right.
I don't know about Musk, but I don't know what his educational background was. I think it was probably deeper than most. He's very knowledgeable on a lot of things that you just don't pick up in the street. So you've got this. I'll give you an example. I had step brothers and sisters. Brilliant. Always got scholarships to all the different schools. Nice people.
Mm-hmm.
They can't make a living.
Sure.
They can make a living, but it's not at the level that certainly I wanted to live at. And most young corporate types, they're on a salary and they get a bonus and they get 2 weeks vacation and then another week every year or whatever. But it's only one CEO and one chairman of the board. And most of them aren't going to make it to that level. So if you're happy with that life, that's great. If you want something larger, more affluent, you need to be more entrepreneurial.
Sure. Because
you're not going to find that in the corporate world for the most part. I ended up representing a lot of landlords who really depended on me to let them know what the value of their space were or are. We've represented Boston Properties at the General Motors building. We've represented landlords on Fifth Avenue who bought properties and looked to put larger tenants in. If you look at the building at 666 Fifth Avenue, which is where Uniqlo, Zara, Hollister, and one other are. This was Fifth Avenue frontage, but if anybody knew that building, there was an entrance from Fifth Avenue into the building and a little kiosk in the middle of it. So you're taking the most valuable of the space and making it an entrance. What we ended up doing is closing that entrance, putting entrances on the side street, and making contiguous retail space. So now you've got retail space that goes to the third floor, down to the basement, where before it was lackluster for the better or worse. Brooks Brothers was there in a corner store. Now Uniqlo's there, and they occupy 110,000 square feet. We have been handling a building in Times Square for the past 35 years. It was 35 years ago, Times Square wasn't such a nice place.
Sure.
But we ended up taking all the retail space out of that block from 44th to 45th Street. We put Toys R Us in, if anybody remembers that store. They put a big Ferris wheel in the front of it. And they were 125,000 square feet, where it was then the largest store ever done in Times Square. And since then, most of the stores within the bow tie, which is 47th to 42nd Street, are larger stores. They're more credit and more expensive. The rents there went from $50 a foot when I started to $2,000 a square foot before the pandemic.
My gosh.
And now it's somewhere around $800 to $1,000 a foot.
Incredible.
But $800 to $2,000 a foot is still a lot more than $50 to $100 20 years earlier.
Wow.
So most of the landlords who own buildings for that length of time are very happy with their investment. People who bought their buildings the year or two before the pandemic might not be so happy because they buy their property based on their projected income. And most buy properties that have occupied tenants on the ground floor and basement and second floor. They end up buying them out or leases expiring, and they put together spaces and they go to lease it at what they perceive would be the market value. But if the market value drops 50%, all of a sudden, if you just bought the property, depending on 100% income, usually the banks are the people you're then talking to. Because the banks who finance them can't afford to not find a tenant, and the landlords can't afford to make deals for less than the financing costs.
Sure.
So it becomes a circular kind of a problem. It happened in the 80s. It's happened now, but not with the landlords who own property forever and ever. A number of the REITs, the real estate investment trusts, are in trouble now because they've seen values drop. And, with what happened during the pandemic for office tenants is a lot of office users realized there are parts of their business that don't have to be in their offices on Fifth Avenue. They could be in Omaha, for lack of better. Mm-hmm. The communication is great. It wasn't 25 years ago, but now no one knows where you are.
Right.
They just know you're answering an email or you're answering a text. Yep. Our offices are in Canada, Colliers.
Right.
But no one knows we're not here or there. I mean, my office is in New York, of course, and our New York offices are on Bryant Park. But accounting doesn't need to be there. HR, for the most part, doesn't need to be there. Some of them do. So I think that what this pandemic has done is let people realize what parts of their business really need to be in their head offices and what needs to be someplace they can communicate with.
Sure.
And the middle of the country is a good place. Yep. Because you're 2 hours and 2 hours, or an hour and a half, Yep. It kind of works itself out easily. Retail is a product of the people who walk in front of it. And to the extent we don't have the Chinese, which used to be very prevalent here in New York, tourists, we certainly don't have the Russians, which used to be there. So the Chinese who used to go into Louis Vuitton, for lack of better, and buy 12 handbags, they're not there. Now, Louis Vuitton is doing very well, but a lot of the retailers aren't doing what they were doing. For example, the watch dealers. Chinese guy used to walk in and buy a dozen watches. That business is not there for them anymore because those people aren't there anymore. And a lot of these retailers shot themselves in the foot because they opened up retail spaces in China. So now they don't have to come. Yeah. They don't have to buy them when they're here if they can buy them there. So it's complex, but it'll find its way. It always does.
Right. What have you done to adapt to that pandemic piece? Did you get concerned? How do you, as being in the center of it and the nucleus of it all, because I've heard it. I mean, I watched all the news and I saw the reports. Retail is taking a hit. Stores are closing left and right. Another one, obviously, restaurants are a form of retail, right? Because they're brick and mortar. They have space. They're not selling shoes and bags and clothes and things like that on different scales. But when that happens, Brad, what's the adaptation for you? How do you adjust to the fact that that's the new reality? And does it scare you? Are you thinking to yourself, you know what, I've been here before for multiple decades and I'm prepared for this? What goes on inside of you and how do you move forward in the process and keep doing what you're doing, considering that the whole climate is changing?
Nobody's prepared for this. It's never happened like this before. We've had downturns. We've had, financial difficulties. But you saw entire neighborhoods just go dark.
Right.
And some have come back strong. Now, not at the numbers they were before. So I don't know how well your listeners or you know New York City, but Bleecker Street is a little boutique street down in the village.
I love Bleecker Street. That's
Okay.
fantastic. Yeah,
So
was.
Bleecker Street, during the pandemic, everything was closed.
Wow.
And a lot of the business didn't reopen. Now all that space has been leased. And people are open and they're doing business because people are out there spending money. But you take areas like Fifth Avenue and Times Square, they haven't recovered so well. They are mostly flagship kinds of locations, and that business seems to have dried up for the moment. We did a lot of flagship type transactions. Well, I'll give you an example. We rented a space on Fifth Avenue to a major retailer who had a delayed occupancy for whatever reason. And they're paying in the $35 million a year range for a big chunk of space.
Wow.
They're not going to occupy the space. So we're now subleasing it for them. And I'm not sure we'll see half of that rent. And you take Ralph Lauren, who had a store on Fifth Avenue. Having nothing to do with the pandemic, he closed a lot of retail stores that they operated themselves. And on the space he rented on Fifth Avenue, I think they're taking a $15 million, $20 million a year hit on the rent that they're paying, deducting the rent they got on a sublease. Because, when you're subleasing space, you get what you can.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They're still obligated to pay the base rent because they're a financially strong company, which is why most landlords don't rent to mom and pops in the central business district. You talk about restaurants. I was out with your friend Mark Advent actually last night for dinner. He's in New York. And we went to a restaurant down in the Gramercy Park area. Beautiful restaurant. It was jammed. And we're not talking about a cheap restaurant. Food was great. They're doing great business. But you take all the fast casuals that opened up on side streets in Midtown that depended on only one meal, the lunch business that came out of the office buildings. Well, if the office buildings are only 50% occupied, which they're not yet, but they probably will be after the summer, you're dealing with 50% of the workers. Is that enough to keep them alive? Well, the answer to that is the following. They're already dead.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So new ones can come back because spaces have been improved and the cost of occupancy is cheaper because they don't do a lot of the air conditioning, exhaust work, and things like that. Rents will have to be cheaper because the volume is going to be less. So it's a big change for a lot of people. On the Upper East and Upper West Sides, lots of vacancies. If people aren't working, because some of them aren't, they're not spending money. The strong who can pay the rent, they'll survive. When the pandemic happened, it's not like rent stopped. It's not like mortgage payments to the mortgagors stopped. The building owners still had the expense of running a building. Mm. And although a lot of very large, very financially strong tenants stopped paying rent to see if they could figure out how to get out of their leases, they all got slapped and had to pay interest on the money that they didn't pay, and they have to pay their rent. The only way they get out of paying rent is if they go bankrupt, and no one really wants to go bankrupt.
Right.
If they have to.
Right.
If they have to, it's what they do. But large tenants whose names I'm not going to mention just stop paying rent, using that fact as leverage to renegotiate with their landlords. And I think some probably did. Others, I know many who didn't. They figured they don't need that monthly rent to pay their bills. They'll collect it eventually anyway, and they do, and they did. But I've never seen it like this, and I don't think it'll ever go back to where it was. I'm not sure. Well, start with the fact that the rental levels in Manhattan were blown out of proportion prior to the pandemic. And retail had slowed down before the pandemic. The pandemic just added more fuel to that fire. But you take people like LVMH, they're still expanding. You know, they own Tiffany's. They redid Tiffany's, and it's beautiful. And you can go there for breakfast at Tiffany's, which everybody sees during the movie that they watched. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, I'm not a crystal ball reader, but I don't see business going back to where it was. And like everything, like we did before, we just have to reinvent ourselves and figure out how to get to where we were in some way, shape, or form.
Sure. I love that last part right there where it's a reinvention of yourself. Now, are you talking from a professional level, Brad, and or internally as a man at this stage of your life when you say that? Or are you talking more about the broader industry of retail in that case? Because clearly you have a lot of perspective, and I don't know why I find what you're sharing with me beyond fascinating for various reasons. I think the center of all things, that kind of when the pandemic started, New York was kind of the first spot that it all was developing out of. And then I remember I met my fiance now. She was living in New York, Hoboken, but doing a lot of work in the city. And I went and visited her right in the middle of COVID. It was June of 2020. And so I went out there, and to your point, it was shut down, dried up, and you could hear the rats walking around on the streets. It was so bad because it was so anti what I had experienced from before in New York. But going back to the reinvention thing, for you, is it I'm considering how to do my business differently now, though that's a given. That's understood, right? Yeah, of course it has to be that way. But is that a complete shift for you in the field that you're working in? Is that hey, I'm at this point in my life, do I just hang it up, retire, and then, go try to figure something else out? What does that mean when you say reinvent yourself?
I'll give you an example. I'm doing work in your hometown now.
Oh, well, welcome to Vegas.
Okay. And on projects that are being developed, not existing projects. I'm working on projects not actively working on, but will be in Dubai. So I'm doing what I do, but other places, because there's not enough business here in New York to support the lifestyle that I learned to live on. And there's not enough activity in the marketplace. So while I'll still be working, for Colliers, of course, and I'll be involved in whatever we do in the New York area, it's a lot less than we're used to doing. I'm on the landlord side mostly. So if you're representing a tenant who's looking to enter into the market, it's a perfect time. Landlords are more flexible, rents are cheaper.
Sure.
And I think you'll see a lot of expansion there. And there's a lot has been done with that, with the fast casual kinds of food users who now can take space on avenues that they couldn't afford before. It just gets to a point where there's only so many meals you can serve in a day, and there's only so many people you can get through the door between the hours that you're selling food. I mean, no one's buying lunch, 10 o'clock in the morning, and breakfast is already done. And for a lot of the stuff Midtown, there is no dinner. Unless you're in the Times Square, Broadway area, people going to shows. And then there is that kind of work. And we have property there. We have property there, so we're active there. Fortunately for the landlord, unfortunately for us, we've leased all our space there. More space would be nice because we can lease that space. But having space you can't lease is difficult. And there's a lot of space that landlords can't lease because they can't get the money they were depending on. And anybody who's going into a space, a large enough space, needs a non-disturbance by the mortgagee. So if the landlord goes broke, the mortgagee recognizes them. If they don't have a non-disturbance from the landlord, the mortgagee could just cancel their lease, throw them out, and get somebody in who can pay more rent. that's not a good thing for the retailer. And you can't get a non-disturbance if you're not paying substantially enough rent to pay the mortgage. So again, you're dealing with a circular kind of a situation that you need to get the rent you need so the mortgagee can give a non-disturbance, mortgagor can give a non-disturbance, and that's not happening a lot. Will the market get stronger? Yes. Again, supply and demand. As space gets leased up by landlords who can lease their space, there'll be less space and there'll be more tenants looking for space. And as the environment changes, and it will, you'll see, I don't know if we'll ever see Russia again in the States, not in the next foreseeable future, certainly not while they're dealing with Ukraine and those issues. And Russia's a mess right now. They were a mess before, they're really a mess now. China, will we see Chinese people here soon? I don't know. But in order for the market to rebound to anywhere near what it was, we need the kind of tourism that really bolsters the economy. During the pandemic or shortly thereafter, we had tourists, but they're mostly Americans coming from the Midwest or coming from the South. And it's not like they can't get what we sell here at home. They can. When Europeans come over, they can go places that they can't go at home. So that business doesn't really exist. The retailers that used to do business off the tourists aren't doing it as they did with the American tourists. You need the international tourism to get back to where it was, as far as I'm concerned, for any reasonable, substantial rebound.
Sure. Understood. That makes sense. A lot of sense. I'm curious, Brad, so we've talked a lot about the market and sort of what's happening in New York. What is actually going on when you're orchestrating what your job is, what your duty is, right? I'm sure there's a lot of layers to it. And so obviously you've been doing this quite some time, so you probably have some equity in terms of, knowing the right people at the right time, and you've compounded those relationships and the value of that over the years. But is a Mark coming to New York and saying, Brad, let's go sit down for dinner. I want to talk to you about leasing out this space. I need you to connect me with the landlord there. Walk us through what that process looks like for you. What is really going on for you to do what you do at the highest level?
Well, Mark coming to New York was more of a vacation for him. Actually, he had business here, but he recently got married and he was here with his wife. But he, like other developers, are seeing opportunity. They're getting a lot of money out of the Middle East to finance a lot of their ventures. And they want to do things. And there's a lot of creative people out there who want to do things. So you take creative people, the fact that the market did get a little dull and probably dropped a bit. That was an opportunity to pick up land where there wasn't that opportunity before because it was too expensive. You had some foreclosures which added to that. And I just see the ability to do more creative things outside of Manhattan than in Manhattan right now. Right now, we're dealing with existing availabilities and who can we put where. And again, a lot of the landlords can't rent their space. We rented space in the St. Regis Hotel. You know where that is?
I'm not exactly
sure. St. Regis is on 54th to 55th on Fifth Avenue.
Okay. Yep.
Some of the most valuable property in the city. It ran up in value greatly pre-pandemic. Someone bought a retail unit, a condominium, for $100 million. 3 months later, sold it for $375 million. 6 months later, it was sold for $720 million. And most of this is financed at least 50%. So if the space drops in value in half, you're underwater with your mortgagee. You just are. I mean, you can't afford to lease your space unless you renegotiate your financing and the bank writes down some of that cost. And that's what's happening, because the last thing the banks want is to end up with the property, because they're not real estate people.
Right.
They're finance people. So it scares them to think that they may end up with having to operate the property or put it up for sale, because when a bank puts it up for sale, it becomes a fire sale. So I think what's happening now, and happened in the 80s also, banks are working with their owners to renegotiate the financing some way, shape, or form, to get it to a level where then people can afford to rent their space and get the non-disturbance that's necessary for retailers to take the space, because no one's going to make a major investment in an owner's property, which is what retailers do. I mean, if you take a look at what it costs to build a store, you can spend $1,000 a square foot easily in Manhattan, and finishings can be a lot more. Certainly for restaurants, it's a whole lot more expensive. So again, it's a moving target. I don't know where it ends up.
No, I understand that. So I think kind of going back to the center of what I was thinking there was, for you, is even though it's shifting, and are you negotiating the deal? Are you calling out every day? Like, there's different levels to the depth of how somebody does their work, right? So it's like, if I come in here, I know we got to get the studio set up, got to sit down, got to get you locked in. I've got to reach out to you via text and email you back and forth and do that process here. That's a very simple example of like what I do here for this. But your actual duty, is it baked in high level relationship and negotiation? Is that the skill involved in it, or is
it's both?
It's both. Go ahead.
Being a real estate broker is no different than being a psychiatrist. You need to be able to handle the emotions and the economic side of what an owner's dealing with, and try to show him how he can come out, if he can come out. And a lot of landlords will say, you know what, I'm just going to hold. I'm not going to rent my space. I'm just going to wait until the market improves. And a company that we represent bought a building on Fifth Avenue, which goes straight through to Madison. And when they closed on the property, the space on Madison Avenue was leasing at $1,200 a foot. Within a very short period of time, the market had dropped, and no one was getting more than $600 a foot. And they said, you know what? We're just going to paint the windows black. Wait out the market. And they did. And they were successful. We were successful in leasing the space 2 or 3 years later. So that's what landlords who can afford to do. The ones who can't afford to do that either have to sell their property and get out of there, because they're not going to be able to lease it, or renegotiate with their banks. And that means the bank's got to write down, some of their loans. We're on uncharted territory.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a testament to how responsive somebody can be to make things like that work. We talk a lot about, and I say we because this conversation, that's what I'm giving straight line to when I say we. But the landlord themselves, when the landlord, you keep mentioning the landlord, is the landlord that you're talking about some very wealthy multi-property owner that is, like you just mentioned, Dubai, there's overseas money? Or is this guy Obviously, there's a name that comes out. Trump. Trump owns buildings in New York, or is this another type of an individual that owns the property? Like when you talk about landlords in New York, what are we talking about in that capacity?
It runs the gamut
Okay.
from real estate investment trusts.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know what that is, right?
Yeah, REIT. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
collection. Yeah, but please explain it to me for I would say
So,
further
so,
development
so
of
a
it.
real estate investment trust is a public entity that people can actually buy shares
Mhm.
in. One that comes to mind is Vornado, very big real estate investment trust, and you can buy stock in it. Um, and they own 15, 20 million square feet of office space, a ton of retail space. Um, so you're dealing with that kind of an owner who is less interested in negotiating the price
Mm.
than somebody who actually runs that building out of their pocket.
Hmm.
So, for example, the property in Times Square that we handle, which is a block front, it's owned by a family. You know, they own the property. They've owned it since 1975.
Okay.
They've seen a huge increase in value, of course, during the past 25, 30 years. But if they don't collect rent, they can't pay their bills. So when the Gap and Old Navy, who were tenants of theirs, stopped paying rent, it hurt. They needed to have the strength to hold until they got through court. And they knew they would ultimately be successful, but it's a process. And large companies sometimes use that process to negotiate against the landlord. You know, we'll file for bankruptcy. That's automatic 6 months, and then it goes to court. You never know what's going to happen in court. So, it's either an affluent single owner, like the people who own the property in Times Square, or it's a real estate investment trust, or it's just a mom and pop owner who were left the property by their parents. And sometimes that happens. I know a family that inherited a office building, not a large office building, but I don't know what it's worth, a lot. And they got it and they run it and they hire professionals like myself and others to handle office space, to lease it and make sure it's handled correctly. And, Colliers is a third-party manager. We manage a lot of real estate for people who own it, but don't have the ability or the capability of managing a large property. A lot goes into that, maintenance, garbage removal, and, air conditioning contractors, new construction that happens within the property, because every time a new office tenant comes in, they rip out the old office installation and put in a new one that suits their purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Very seldom do you find something that was there that really suits your purpose. You say, gee, I don't have to do anything. But it happens. So we represent usually owners of property that are quality retail environments, tourist areas, Fifth Avenue, Times Square, some parts of Soho. But we're not your Upper East Side, Upper West Side kind of guy. There's other companies that do that better than we do. We kind of specialize in the, larger rent environment because it pays more,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Sure. Did you know that's what you wanted to do, or were you working towards that sort of as part of the genesis to get to where you are?
I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. I didn't really know the business. I knew retail. I didn't know real estate when I started. It wasn't hard to learn. And it's gotten much more sophisticated over the years. I mean, I started in 1972. And when rents on Fifth Avenue were in the $50 to $75 a foot range. The last deals we got on Fifth Avenue were $5,000 a square foot. So it's changed substantially. Uh, and I'm not saying that, well, it's changed. New York has changed and New York has grown. And the better New York got, the more people came. The more people came, the better, the more value the real estate had. But no, I didn't grow up thinking to myself, what I want to do is be a retail real estate broker. I didn't even know there was a real estate. You never even think about it, but you're walking down the street, there's an office building. You don't think how many tenants are in that building.
Right.
You don't think of, is that retail space coming available or not? You just see a store. So you go into the store and you buy something. It doesn't enter into most people's reality that getting that store there is really a business, and it takes know-how and tenacity to get these deals done. Because very seldom do you run into a landlord who'll say, yeah, I'll take exactly what you want to pay.
There's a lot of back and forth, I can imagine. So Brad, what skill, what abilities does one need to make it doing what you're doing? Whether that was the skill that you had when you first got into it, whether that's the skill that you have today, what is it that
I think it's a bit of the gift of the gab kind of a thing. So being knowledgeable about your product, knowing what's going around, knowing what's going on around where you're trying to work, and convincing, in my case, convincing a landlord that he's better off hiring me to lease the space than he is doing it himself. And a lot of it is expense driven for landlords. They know if they hire a broker, they have to pay him. Mm-hmm. They don't know if they don't hire a broker that they won't rent their space. A lot of them think they can put a sign in the window and rent it themselves. But inevitably what happens is a broker calls on the sign and they have to deal with that broker. So they're better off, in my mind, hiring someone who knows what he's doing and knows all the brokers, because very few single broker transactions happen anymore. You've got brokers who represent tenants and brokers who represent landlords. And the tenants and the landlords are guided by us. Okay? I'll tell my landlord what I think we can get and what it's going to take to get there. Sure. They'll tell their tenant what they believe they can get it for and how much it's going to cost them to get it. So they come in asking for everything that they want. Not everything they're going to get, but they know that going in. And a lot of times when you're dealing with a broker who knows what he's doing, who's representing a tenant, you know how to deal with him. And he knows, because he's done business with you before and will be doing business with you in the future, hopefully, what he's got to do to get a deal done. And it's not a matter of price all the time. It's a matter of the other conditions that exist within a lease document. I mean, you're dealing with documents here that are 33, 40 pages long, and they're covering a myriad of things that one would never think about. The newest of which is going to be dealing with, how do you deal with pandemics should they happen again? Because the government really shut down businesses. But there's nothing in the lease that says if the government shuts down a business, you don't have to pay. Huh. Yeah. And the mortgagee would never sign. The mortgagor would never Correct. Give a non-disturbance if they thought there was going to be a possibility in the future that they weren't going to get the rent. So it's a juggling act, and it's just, how do you deal with the people you're dealing with? And it's different for both sides. Mm-hmm. Just have to know how to handle people.
Sure, that's good.
But in any entrepreneurial business, that's what it is.
Yeah,
it's how do you handle the people and get them to understand what it is they're dealing with and how they best deal with it.
Is there a benefit to doing this brokerage work with a company like Colliers versus? And again, assume that I don't know anything and I'm asking it from a dummy's perspective. Is that a benefit because they have a brand and are recognized and are trusted and have systems and so I think, I think of a franchise. Why does somebody buy a franchise? Well, because they have all of the different angles covered and boxes checked, and you basically say, "Here's my money," and the franchisor says, "Great, here's our system, go do it." And then you have what has become you're now the owner of that franchise in that specific place. For you, is it the same in essence where you have support from Colliers?
Yeah, we can give, and most of the major firms can do the same thing. We all have the same information, and we can all make fancy reports, and we all have consulting departments. I deal with people who are buying businesses, and those businesses can have hundreds of stores all over the country. So it's a matter of, in that case, having offices everywhere you need to have offices is very helpful. If you're a single practitioner, you can't do that.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that the other competitors can't also do that.
Right. With puppies back,
Sorry.
dogs back.
Yep.
I can hear it. I love it. We've had cats on the show. We've had dogs on the show. I don't think, no birds or monkeys yet, but who knows? We just never know. Sometimes it happens. Maybe Mark will bring one of those exotic animals when we do his podcast. That'd be fun. So okay, let's ask this question, right? Obviously, you've lived some life. You're wise. What is it that you are less able to do nowadays? Do you feel like you've been able to maintain and I think it's just a natural kind of question around like life evolution. Are you as good as you were 20 years ago based on the fact that you've now lived more life, or are you pulling your foot off the throttle a little bit to evaluate a different quality of life? Like, how do you take on a day-to-day basis the energy that you utilize, Brad, in order to be the best you can be? And I guess that also gets layered with, like, based on what you've done, do you have to work as hard because you've made so much money or whatever so that you don't have to do as much? Like, where are you at kind of in governing where you sit in terms of time of life and quality of life and energy of life now at this point?
Well, there's a couple of different questions in there.
Yes, definitely.
I think I'm better now than I ever was because I'm more knowledgeable than I ever was. And, knowledge is really king in this business. We have people who work with us who do a lot of the groundwork that I used to do when I started the business. So I have access to all the information I need. And to the extent I don't have within my own firm, I can collect that information fairly quickly. Because in my business, nobody doesn't take my call. And there are people whose calls that I don't have time to take, and people under me will return those calls for me. It's not because I'm better than that. I just don't have the time. Or they can answer their questions quicker than I'd be able to. And I depend on the young people who work with us to keep me up to date on what's going on in the market, and we're always up to date. I get emails every day about deals that got done, who the tenant was, what the concession packages were, and what the net effective rent will be. And the market is a constantly changing environment. It's, again, supply and demand. As the supply diminishes and the demand increases, your rents are going to push up. And if you're representing a tenant, you've got to let them know that their problem is if they don't act, by the time they decide to act, the rents could be substantially higher. And then they deal with the fact that if you're too pushy, you're just a pushy real estate broker trying to make a deal and throwing them under the bus. So it's a balance. But anybody who has substantial space large, complicated spaces will come to us, or someone like us. We've done complete block fronts where, you're dealing with 210 feet or 200 feet of frontage, and you're dealing with, 40,000 feet per floor, 3 floors. How do you best divide that up so you're not ending up with a piece of space you can't find or can't get to? Because what happens is if you do that, you're actually reducing the amount of money the landlord could have gotten by not dividing it correctly and finding the right tenants for those types of spaces. So it's a twofold kind of a situation. My business partner, a guy by the name of David Green, is both an attorney and an accountant. He can answer legal questions and accounting questions that I couldn't possibly touch. And I'll depend on him for that information. At the same point in time, if I took him into a basement of a building and turned him around, he couldn't find his way out. He's just not spatially good.
Sure.
He's smart. He can negotiate a lease with the best of them. But if it comes to understanding space, he's not as quick at that as I might be, or as somebody else might be. So you have to realize what your assets are and depend on the people you work with. And one person can't do that. So if you're, I shouldn't say that. One person might be able to do that, but it takes an awful lot to have both a legal and accounting background and understand, floor plans and ceiling heights and column spanning and all those items that come into renting space to a tenant, because you can create space that's just not rentable or rentable at such a low rent it doesn't make sense. And that comes into the design. So we'll be called in when someone's designing a building to make sure that the owner is ending up with the best possible retail space to lease, as opposed to putting columns where they shouldn't be. And at the end of the day, it's a positive for the landlord, because if you're dealing with just an architect, don't get me wrong, they're very good and they're very smart, but they're looking at a whole building. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter to them if you're taking a column and putting through a space that might be great for retail if that column wasn't there. So the spaces either need to be designed differently, and they do get designed differently. I mean, there's nothing, if you're coming out of the ground with something, there's nothing you can't do with it. It's just a matter of how much it costs to get it done.
Interesting. Okay. I think I'm very curious about so many things that I don't know really much about. Obviously, I'm learning as we've been discussing, but with the sort of, I call this, now I'm just thinking about a little mini masterclass on retail real estate in New York, right? It's almost like what we've been experiencing here. As we wrap up, a couple things I always ask. I know I always ask what I'm going to ask at the end, but then I think sometimes I pop this in there because clearly you've got some wisdom in life, which is there anything else that you would want to add to what we've talked about here that you think that is important to life, business, just entrepreneurship, retail, real estate, that you didn't get a chance to share, that I didn't take you in that direction to, that you think is valuable knowledge that someone should hear and be able to take away with them, Brad?
When I started the business, I was up against, and there weren't people who were strictly retail based. But there were companies who had inroads with landlords that you couldn't get through. So I always picked the people to do business with that nobody else wanted to do business with. Sometimes more difficult to collect the fees. Sometimes not as reliable. But if I were starting out today, I would try to find something that somebody isn't concentrating on and concentrate on that. Because you're not going to go against someone coming into business is not going to go against me and win a great deal of the time.
Yeah.
But That doesn't mean once they get known in the business, they can't. It's just that if they're not known, no one likes to go with an unknown.
Mm-hmm.
In our business, we only have time.
Sure.
And landlords have vacant space; they want it rented.
Yeah.
Or the space that's coming up, or a larger space that's going to come up, and there's no tenants out there for that space in its current configuration. So what do? I was once hired to lease a movie theater in a building. Guy owned the whole block. It had a 50-foot front. And it went back 100 feet. And then there was the auditorium. But it's hard to find a tenant for that configuration of space. Mm-hmm. So I had to go and convince him, you got to get rid of all your other tenants. And then we can configure it more reasonably. Mm. Because otherwise you're just going to take a hit on what that space could be worth. And to the extent they can, they do.
Yeah. That's a great point. It reminds me of what maybe you read it, the book Blue Ocean Strategy, where you're not competing in a pool of other sharks where there's always a bunch of blood already in the water. Why go there when you can find your main area that you shine in, that you stand out in, that is less competitive? What's the edge that you bring to the table, right, Brad?
That's exactly right.
What you're saying there. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And no, that I think then the creative, critical thought there on the back end of what you just said there too is very much important. Where you're also thinking outside the box. Where in your case you were strategic in how you discuss that with the landlord as far as redoing the space versus trying to take something that it reminds me of trying to put a round peg into a square opening, right? And it's like, wait a second, that ain't going to work either, right? So it's kind of like what you're just sharing right there. Very cool. Very cool. So my last question for you as we wrap this up and get back to your business out there in New York, dog, ideally probably with the family over there. What does always on the grow mean to you?
What is always on the grow? Well, I think what it means to me is, well, I wouldn't use the word grow normally. It's everything's always evolving. Mm. So what it is today isn't what is going to be tomorrow, and it's not what it was yesterday. So you've got to be able to think ahead and get ahead of the curve as opposed to following the curve. Because if you're following it, someone's already done the business.
That's powerful. I like that a lot. I always get giddy when I hear new ones that I haven't heard before. I was thinking about how to optimize what we're doing over here too, and use the new fun words. Hey, listen, this is I've enjoyed learning about where you stand in the journey of real estate and retail. I'm going to tell Mark we had a good conversation here. I do also ask, is there anything to promote that you want to share, or I can't imagine, if my audience isn't going to be coming out and saying, hey, I want to lease a building in Times Square, or, I'm not buying a property.
If anybody has something they want leased, I'm happy to talk to them. If anybody wants to lease something, I'm happy to talk to them as well.
There you go. See, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. We'll make sure we make that bridge and that connection. Cool. Well, Brad, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for jumping on the show. I've enjoyed having this dialogue with you and learning more about how you think and how you see the world, and having you bring us into the retail world. I think it's been very, very intriguing, to say the least. I almost felt like I was getting a crash course on how it works. So God bless you, my friend. And until next time, we'll have to connect. We're actually going to be in New York, I believe October. So if we're there, when we're there, I'll reach out. We'll have to...
Yeah. Reach out. Let's go have a drink.
That'd be great. I don't drink anymore, but I'll have a water and I'll watch you have your.
I don't drink anymore.
Okay. Well, we'll have waters, man. Have a good dinner at a nice restaurant there. Cool. All right, my friend. God bless. Thanks, Brad.